on January 17th, 2018. Let me acknowledge that Commissioner Flanagan is joining in as authorized on the phone. Hopefully she'll be able to hear us, and we'll all be able to hear her. But welcome, and with Commissioner Flanagan, we do have a complete quorum. Because we have a remote participant today, all votes that we take will be done via roll call. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Can I ask, is anybody recording this? Let the record show that this meeting is being recorded, and then let me put the public on notice that the meeting is being recorded. Can everybody hear me? Great.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a relatively short agenda today, and I just have a few comments to make before we get started. One is a comment with respect to the agenda. We, at our last commission meeting, spoke about nominations for...
And probably early next week for additional postings to be made. Not yet determined as to which those will be, but the current job posting that's available is Chief of Investigations and Enforcement.
Okay, thank you. I have no other announcements to make at this time, so let's move on to the first agenda item. And the first agenda item is discussion and review and approval of the meeting minutes from December 11th, 2017. Let me just acknowledge at this point the painstaking and painful efforts of both Commissioner Doyle and Mary Alice in terms of taking these long transcripts and putting them together in the form of meetings. We have circulated the 12-11 minutes. Does anybody need a copy? Are there any questions or comments on the minutes? Jen, you have a copy?
Yes.
To each of the commissioners on his recommendations. Jen, again, do you have a copy of that?
I do.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you articulated, this was a condensed timeline. It began really at the commission level on November 28th, when the commission approved both the business requirements for these two technology resources, as well as the procurement process, which was then posted subsequently to our website and on the ComBuys, the Mass State Procurement website, on December 1st. The process really recognizes or acknowledges the deadlines that the Commission is currently facing and our need to deploy these solutions as quickly as possible to make sure that we can function as it pertains to licensing and then subsequently to tracking the cannabis throughout the market. So again, it was deliberately aggressive, but at all times remained open, fair, competitive, and as you pointed out, very thorough on our part as well as on the responses that the vendors supplied. So you have a timeline in front of you. I'll go through that very quickly. So again, we posted it on December 1st. The deadline to submit proposals was December 12th. On December 18th, there were 6, albeit 4 companies, there were 6 proposals that were selected to move into what was a proof of concept demonstration. And the reason that there were 4 companies with 6 solutions, we made it available for each vendor to say, I'm proposing one of each individually, or I'm proposing a holistic solution that is both licensing and seed to sale together. So that kicked off what was phase 2, being the demonstration projects, and we began, actually Luella, I will give her credit for this, engaging with the various vendors on almost a daily basis to answer any questions that they might have and making ourselves available. We also responded to any questions that they might have formally.
Sean, you might want to just share the process that we used to pare the original submissions down to the 6 or the 4 vendors and the 6 solutions.
That's right. So we pulled together a procurement management team that consisted of 5 individuals. Those individuals were myself, Chairman Hoffman, Luella Wong, our contractor, Mary Alice Gill, our program manager, and Danielle Ondrick, again from EOTS, as a technology expert. Those 5 individuals reviewed each and every response that we received. We also convened, I believe it was on the 17th, to discuss and deliberate on each response after individually scoring each of the responses. It was at that time that we chose those 6 solutions, 3 each for licensing and seed to sale tracking, to proceed to the second phase, being the proof of concept demonstration. To get to that point between the 12th, when submissions were made, and the 18th, when the vendors were notified, took many hours of review, and many hours of analysis of each individual response. The procurement that the commission laid out and posted on our website did set kind of a page limit to make sure that we were able to get through those as quickly as possible, but wanted to make sure that they had the opportunity to really present their projects or their solutions as well. So it was a balancing act to make sure we could respond as quickly as we needed to. That then proceeded into phase 2, which again was the demonstration and the presentations. That occurred in our office on January 10th and 11th. For again, many hours, we gave each vendor an opportunity to present for an hour and a half, an hour presentation, 30 minutes for questions and answers. And again, if a vendor or a company proposed both solutions, we gave them a 3-hour time slot to make sure that they had the opportunity to present both. So that's a sense of the timing and the process that we took to get here today. Again, mindful that we have really tight deadlines. I want to acknowledge that the timeline that was proposed in the RFP is being adhered to. We discussed, and actually somehow we might have anticipated that Monday was a holiday, so we would be convening on the 17th because our RFP actually says we'll announce on the 17th. So we are still on timeline. I want to articulate at this point that each of the finalists of the second phase respondents could do this job and could do this, could provide these solutions that we need and could do it within the time frame. So there's a lot of confidence amongst the PMT that we have the resources we will need in order to achieve our deadlines at this point. Now, of course, we still have to enter the contract negotiation phase and then actually develop and deploy these systems. So a lot to still occur. So with that being said, I'm prepared at this point to make 2 recommendations. One is for the licensing solution. The second is for the seed to sale tracking. Both were unanimous choices of the PMT. The PMT for the second phase was also the same PMT for the first phase, those 5 individuals. And it was unanimous choice for licensing. Again, we evaluated 3 demonstrations, and the unanimous choice of the PMT was to commence negotiations with a company named JD Software. They are a vendor based in Salem, Mass. And again, there was a lot of confidence amongst the group that any of the proposals could have done this. There were certain kind of distinguishing factors that I'd like to identify. The first for JD Software was that they have the ability to, their functionality of their reporting and their exporting of relevant data could be leveraged as far as the commission's concerned to make sure that we have accurate and good data reports to evaluate. Their ability to adapt to changing requirements. We know that we're in the draft regulation phase at this point, and there's a lot of potential that things may change, and their ability to adapt to those changes was certainly an attractive element. Their ability, obviously, to maintain jobs here in the Commonwealth. They're headquartered in Salem, and everything is housed at their location. Their proposed engagement model, which was essentially that they would be available to us. They are really going to serve as a partner, and that was something that PMT and, of course, the commission identified early on as what we were looking for, a partner that could do this job. And then finally, their references, and specifically, JD Software is a vendor currently for the Department of Public Health in their medical use of marijuana program and serve as their licensing vendor. And so as we look to absorb that program at some point in this calendar year, having someone with that familiarity of that system and that works very closely with them. And of course, the Department of Public Health offered a recommendation as a reference for the company. So based on that, the unanimous recommendation of the PMT would be to commence negotiations with JD Software. I'm happy to go into seed to sale next if you want to.
Yeah, why don't we do seed to sale, and then we'll come back and discuss and vote.
Okay. So similarly, on January 12th, after the presentations, the PMT convened and deliberated as to seed to sale tracking. Based on that deliberation, there is a unanimous recommendation as well. There again, we saw 3 different vendors, and again, the PMT was confident that any one of the 3 could certainly provide the resources and technical expertise that we need. That being said, the unanimous choice of the PMT was to commence negotiations with the company being Franwell and their product named Metric. The distinguishing factors that the PMT identified were that Metric uses RFID tagging, which provides real-time visibility to product inventory and does not rely on audits for tracking. Metric is currently active in the majority of legalized adult use states. Those states are Alaska, California, Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon. And many of those states were happy to serve as references for the product. Metric also works exclusively with regulators. They do not offer a commercial product to licensees, but they do allow for a pretty robust API integration with any vendor or any software that the licensee may choose themselves for inventory or point of sale. And again, Metric provided the commission with competitive and flexible pricing models that we will certainly bring back once the contract is negotiated. It's worth noting that Metric indicated, and they've proven that they can deploy a system relatively quickly. In the case of Nevada, they launched the system in less than 60 days, and we're onboarding folks within 30 days as far as training and development. So again, it was a unanimous decision amongst the PMT to recommend that we commence negotiations with Franwell for their product named Metric.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Let's go one by one and go talk first about the licensing system. Any questions on the process? Any questions on the proposals?
I don't have a question about process, but one of my questions is about your sense of how they would engage in training and their ability to scale appropriately as we build our licensing staff.
So that's a great question. It's one that we actually posed in most of the presentations. And we looked at training as two separate. One is training commission staff on how to use the system. The other is training applicants on how to navigate the system. And from a training of the staff standpoint, the fact that this company is headquartered in Salem, their discussion was, we'll be here. We'll be here in your offices. We'll be working side by side with your staff to make sure that they can navigate the system. One thing that they did indicate was, and this does put a burden on us, or an onus on us, which is they can train based on the system that we develop, so long as there's certain decision points that are made. And if things are changing, if they can lock down the system as far as these are the various steps, then they can develop the training based on that. But if we're going to be changing the product as we deploy it, it's going to be difficult to train, at least on the public side. But once we lock down the system, they indicated they would develop essentially videos that we posted on our website, like tutorials, and they would commission a third party to develop those to make sure that, one, they're presentable, and we would work with them to make sure that it's in the language or the style that we would want it presented. It's not too techy, for lack of a better term. But they looked at training from a robust perspective of how would we train commission staff to make sure that we can navigate it. Also, with JD Software in their product, there's a lot of things that we could manage on our own in our system as far as changing a form on the website. If it's an interactive form, we would have that ability in-house if we had the expertise, but they also could help us manage that too. So for instance, if there was a piece of data we wanted to capture that was mandatory on the form, if you're filling out like say you're buying something on Amazon, you're doing a shipping, and one's a required field, we could do that on our end, or they could do it for us. So it's, they described it as very agile. And
yeah, I thought of all the vendors we saw for licensing. They were by far the most flexible, and not just that their software and technology was flexible, but we could be responsible for making the changes, as opposed to the other ones where we'd have to go to them and say, would you make these changes? And they all promise great response time, but it just feels more comfortable that when we can actually make changes rather than having to go through the vendor to make changes.
Does that answer the question?
It does, yeah. When we're talking about licensing, I guess I am presuming that we are talking about e-forms, that we are talking about completely computer-based. We're not talking about paper applications, or is there a component where there is a e-forms is the default, and then there's a paper application if needed? I mean, what's that?
So at this point, we are talking about exclusively e-forms,
okay,
and therefore electronic workflows as well, internally, of not that someone can submit it online, then we have to print it out and manage it through the process. And one thing that was attractive about their solution in particular is we manage the workflow as well. If, for instance, two things can happen simultaneously, a background investigation could be conducted, as well as making sure that that they're submitting all the relevant profiles of the applicants, or of the not managing, but the key players of the entity could be submitting information as well, and that could happen at the same time, but it wouldn't necessarily be no one person could do, or no two people could do the same thing at once. So we're not duplicating efforts. So it was really managing that workflow internally of various layers of approval as well. So things could advance, but nothing could finalize until the right folks have reviewed it and signed off on it. We manage that internally.
I think there's two more comments in response to your question, Commissioner McBride. One is, I don't think we need to encourage this, but we can discuss it, which is somebody can submit a paper application. We could just enter it ourselves into the electronic system, but all the processing will be done electronically. But I think we could, if we choose to, accept paper applications. I think there's flexibility there. The other thing that I thought JD Software was pretty good at is multi-platform. So I don't know that people are going to be submitting applications through their cell phone, but they could. Yeah. They certainly can track and respond if we get back to them and say you're missing this piece of information. You can do it easily on a cell phone, and it's very graphically friendly to go from a computer screen to a cell phone. So that was another plus of the application as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, okay.
And I actually raised a great point, Mr. Chairman. I forgot to mention this. Prior to the demonstrations, we conducted accessibility and security tests on all of the systems on a pass-fail basis, and all of the vendors passed. Okay. And that was tested by EOTS, or the Executive Office of Technology Services and Security.
Good
so
for
we
you.
Did it ourselves. We
You might be one of 4 people in the state that know what that acronym means.
I'm learning it.
Any other questions? Commissioner Flanagan? Hello?
Yes.
Do you have any questions or
No.
comments on the
I'm good.
licensing technology proposal?
No, I'm good.
Just
Commissioner
a
Tanner?
general question, the background check process, is this software part of that process, or does that happen outside?
So it ultimately would occur outside of this system, but what we would ultimately do is through the API configuration, make sure that things can happen. So if it moves to that phase, we could integrate with whether it's CGIS for query checks, or if there's a database for the fingerprint and the safest checks, we could integrate with that, but it wouldn't be housed within this particular system.
They just talk to each other, and
That's
it's
right.
a pretty adaptable interchange to, it really can talk to pretty much any system, as long as it understands the data configuration.
Part of that speaks to data security as well, making sure that things are not integrated into one database.
So just to follow up on Commissioner Title's question, so we have been assured that all of the security requirements that are necessary for keeping that information, the fingerprinting information, which there are definite security requirements there that,
That's
that those can be satisfied with this vendor.
Yep, and
Okay.
they're a vendor that is, and I don't know what this acronym stands for, but I know it's important. They are FedRAMP certified, and so that meets all of the federal security requirements. And I believe that this platform operates on several federal access points as well.
Other questions or comments?
For me.
Okay, then what I'd like to do is propose that we take a vote first on the license system.
Sorry, then I have more questions.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll ask them separately for the two.
Seed to sale we'll do later, so these
Right.
are on licensing.
Right,
Go
right.
for it.
So,
Go for
okay,
it.
so just in terms of JD Software, during the reference checks, was there any negative feedback?
There was not. I think a lot of the feedback that we got was that success depends upon the investment the agency is willing to make as well. And that was something that even the vendors explained to us, as far as we can build the system that you tell us you need, but it's a question of if you know what you need at the time, and then are you willing to invest the amount of resources that it requires to make sure that it meets your needs. So I think a good question, it was a good question posed to us, was also feedback we got from the vendors of, some of it was the other references. Some of the references would say something to the effect of, we eventually got what we needed once we figured out what we needed, and they were willing to work with us. But if they can build this kind of an out-of-the-box system that'll process a license, but if it doesn't meet our workflow needs, we need to articulate that to them.
So we're going to have to make a pretty substantive investment in this, and I think also, as we discuss seed to sale, in that technology as well, both in terms of staff as well as some subset of the commission being on the steering committee, so that on a weekly basis, I would think, given the short time frame involved here in the development, on a weekly time frame, we have a chance to see progress make comments that we don't think they're doing it the right way, answer their questions, I think, very importantly, and, you know, guide the process on a week basis. And we'll, you know, I think we need to discuss at a subsequent commission meeting how we should constitute the subset of the commission on each of these 2 technology development projects. But it's going to take, as I said, I think a reasonably substantive investment on our side, both staff and commission, to make sure that we address the issues that Sean just talked about.
Right.
Commissioner McBride.
So as we're talking through, you know, we are going to want to land on what we need, obviously, to make sure that we're being efficient here. But in the event that we, as we evolve, have to change what the platform looks like, if we have to, what's the cost of that going to be, and what was the discussion around how, you know, is that built into the contract? How are we going to kind of address that, or is that for a later date and time?
Yeah, I would say formally that's for a later date, but it's something that I'm mindful of, knowing that change orders and those types of things is when you typically can see costs balloon.
Yep.
And it's something that, knowing that this is something that may need to occur in our perspective in phases, that we articulate what those phases look like. And also, we talked a lot about, so the demonstrations that we viewed were mostly in a test environment, and they were kind of test products. They weren't necessarily live, active, deployed products. And so response time was obviously very quick, and things were moving very rapidly, and they could change things here and there. Once the system's deployed, our questions would be, well, how quickly can we change that? Or what is actually going to be available to us on day 1 versus what would be included in phase 2? And that's what we're going to work through in the contract negotiations. But that's something I'm very mindful of, that that's typically where, if things could get expensive, that's when they would.
Right.
So, and I failed to mention as well that the cost proposals provided to us fits within the commission's allotted and allocated budget this fiscal year. And well, depending on the appropriation received, hopefully in future fiscal years as well.
Yeah.
Okay, last 2 questions. In terms of the adaptability to changing requirements, how did you determine that?
Some of it was very direct questions of, is that something we can change? Is that something we have to call you and 2 weeks later it changes? And their reaction was a lot of, and just seeing how they actually made some changes in front of us during the demonstration, said you can come into the forms and you can tweak it here. And some of it was, they also, I want to give JD Software a lot of credit, they read our draft regulations completely and included new license types in their system that the commission developed just weeks earlier. And they were available as far as a process.
They also showed us, for instance, how, if we decided at a subsequent date to add another category of license, how that could be done. And it's pretty straightforward. I'm not saying it doesn't require some training of our staff, but it was a pretty straightforward process. Changing fees, again, a very straightforward process. So I actually thought, and I said this I think 3 minutes ago, of all the 3 licensing vendor proposals we saw, JD Software is by far the most adaptable and flexible, and the one that would allow us to do, I think, the vast majority of those changes in-house once we were trained, rather than having to go through, you know, a process of requesting and seeing how long the turnaround time was. So, because I know we're going to change. I don't know when and what's going to change, but I know there's going to be changes, and I just think JD Software was by far the most responsive and flexible in that respect. You got another question? You said you had 2.
I'm just gathering it in my head. It takes a second sometimes. And also, when you interrupt me, then it starts the whole process again. To your knowledge, have there been any security breaches or unplanned outages?
Not to my knowledge, and that's also one of the reasons we did the security testing, was to see if there was any vulnerability that we could identify. And the fact that they're managing the medical use of marijuana program for the Department of Public Health, and included in that is some HIPAA protected data. There's a high level of confidence, and the fact that they have the FedRAMP certification as well.
Great.
Any other questions or comments? Then I would like to propose that we vote to authorize Sean to begin negotiations with JD Software for the licensing system. Again, it is to begin negotiations. A final contract will come before the commission for discussion and vote. So this is just about authorizing Sean to begin those negotiations. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Okay, let the record show that Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve that recommendation, seconded by Commissioner Teitel. Commissioner McBride, your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Teitel?
Aye.
Commissioner Doyle?
Aye.
Commissioner Flanagan?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman votes aye as well. Let the record show that this was unanimously approved by the commission. Thank you very much. The next agenda item is to talk about the seed-to-sale tracking software. And again, Sean, just if your recommendation is to go forward, just repeat the company, please, and the product name.
Sure, so the company name is Franwell and their product is Metric. They too were put through a accessibility and security test, and from a cost perspective, I indicated they have a flexible model and a model that would be attractive to the commission and affordable within our budget constraints.
Are there questions about the process or about the company or about their technology? Go ahead.
Could you explain more that Metric doesn't provide a commercial product to licensees, but it integrates with the point of sale or inventory management system?
Sure, so there's some vendors that provide kind of regulatory solutions, but then also provide, say, a point of sale or inventory tracking system to licensees as well. And so naturally the connection, the integration would be very simple, but from a Metric standpoint, they only work with regulators and they're not marketing themselves to licensees. But at the same time, what they do, and it gives a licensee a lot of flexibility. A licensee could procure or secure their own point of sale software, and through that API, push data directly to the system. But they're free to choose whichever point of sale or inventory tracking system they want. But Metric wouldn't be selling a product to them as well.
So in the other states that use Metric, it's the same way?
It is. Yep, they're exclusively a regulatory solution.
So the licensees could use, could they come up with their own POS system if they wanted to?
Sure. So the concern that we would have is making sure that they're connected in some fashion to the tracking system to make sure we're collecting, if not real-time, routine data pushes.
So with an API, all you need to do, the providing entity that's pushing data into the other system, all they need to do is be able to show their data structure so that the API can read the right data and bring it into the right field, into the receiving technology. And so literally there are no constraints on the software that the licensees can use as long as they can provide that data table.
Okay.
I'm looking at Luella to make sure that she's not frowning when I'm talking technology. Other questions or comments?
And we did also ask each vendor, so this is an example, making sure that our licensing system can ultimately talk to our seed-to-sale tracking system in the sense that data needs to push from the licensee to the seed-to-sale tracking system. So in order to be in the tracking system, you need a valid active license. And so again, using APIs, both vendors are confident they can connect and make that data connection.
Other questions or comments?
Okay, so the same last two questions. Were there any negative feedback during the reference check?
There were not. So there's a lot of stories and kind of conversations about tracking systems generally, and there's a lot of I guess questions about deployment and how quickly they can do it and how robustly they can do it. And I think for an example is, let's use California. There's several different licensing entities in California, and for instance, the Department of Agriculture will license cultivators, but forget what the full name is. It's a Cannabis Bureau will license retailers, and having them talk to each other and coordinate efforts has proven difficult. But I'm told, and reasonably confident based on references as well, that Metric is prepared to deploy and has been prepared to deploy in California.
So the issue in California is the licensing systems were not ready in time. Not that the Metric seed-to-sale tracking was not. That was indeed in place, and that was a big issue. I mean, we confronted Metric with that. That was, I think, for most of us in the group, that was the biggest issue, just given what happened in California. And I'm reasonably confident. I think I won't speak for the other people. Sean just spoke for himself, though. We're reasonably confident that it was an accurate portrayal, that they were ready to go, and it was an issue on the licensing side.
And then I think the case in Nevada is a good example of, I believe, based on the experience that they were brought in late in the process and were able to deploy within that 60 days. Now, they obviously will tell us that's not ideal, and they'd like to get started as quickly as possible.
I think they use stronger language than that,
I'm
Sean.
sure they did, and we'll negotiate which language we use. But I think that's an example of it's a product that, it's one of those off-the-shelf products we could deploy here, and then in the background, if there's specific reports we would like to maintain, or get, or if there's certain kind of workflows that we would need ourselves just to meet our regulations, they have that ability to do that. But again, there's a lot of confidence that on day one, we will have a tracking system that functions, and that we can put data into, and also share it. We'll need other APIs, for instance, with the Department of Revenue. There might be, whether it's law enforcement, if there's some local entity as well. This would have the ability to make sure we can share data when necessary and appropriate, but also maintain data for our own purposes. And then again, on the reporting side, to make sure if we want to pursue sort of an open data strategy, we can push information out and protect it where we need to as well.
Yeah, I thought Metric was by far the most flexible in terms of, they have a large number of canned reports, which are great, but it's incredibly easy to structure a unique report based upon a specific, and something, again, we wouldn't have to go to them and ask
Wow.
for. So that was one of the serious pluses for me in consideration.
To your knowledge, have there been any security breaches or unplanned outages?
They say there have been none. And they also have, each vendor, this is true for all of them, frankly, that from a disaster recovery standpoint, there's never been a data loss or breach, but they also can react within minutes to make sure we are maintaining live. And if there is any sort of, it's a 15-minute outage, they all that data will migrate to make sure there's no loss. So we can shift from one. We will never know, for instance, if we'll know eventually. Well, they will tell us if there's been some sort of disaster and the recovery's been deployed, but we won't know it from our data standpoint.
Right. There's enough redundancy that we won't lose anything.
That's right.
We might lose 15 minutes of connectivity, but we won't lose any data.
That's right.
So.
Well, I just want to compliment both of you and Luella and Marianne and EATS for
Mary Alice.
all of your hard work, and Mary Alice for your really hard work.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, I said I went to a bunch of meetings. I think Sean and Luella and Mary Alice deserve most of the credit. But I have done, as I said, a lot of these in my lifetime, and this was as well done and professional as anyone I've ever participated in. And that really is Sean and Luella and Mary Alice. So, but thank you for saying that. Any other questions or comments?
I mean, I just have one final. I guess it's going to mirror the initial question I asked, which is in the matter of training. Do you feel as though there is, they're going to be able to train effectively and to sort of be on site as we need them to be? I mean, given that they aren't, I don't know, what their local operations look like. It's a little bit different than, a Salem-based company. I just want to make sure, because we do have to hit really tight timelines, that we are preparing for that.
That's right. No, I think that's a great point. And one of the things that I think will become part of the contract discussion will be what resources they intend to deploy locally. They're a good-sized company that I think one of the questions I had, they're working in a lot of states. What is your bandwidth to take on Massachusetts? Especially when you're working through a state like California. And they expressed a good deal of confidence, and I'd like to see that reduced to contract as well, of what they will deploy locally, what their availability to us will be, and then ultimately once we're launched, what their availability to licensees will be. If there's any questions, they maintain a call center for any licensees that they can call in and express any sort of difficulty or trouble that they're having. They maintain online a good kind of knowledge resource of training materials, and we obviously could customize some of those for Massachusetts needs. And they also do what they describe as roadshows, where they'll go out and either be with licensees specifically, or they'll make themselves available regionally to say, we're now putting on a training if folks want to come. The one thing that they mentioned too is we have the ability as a commission to, and they would encourage training as a condition of licensure to make sure that folks are comfortable and trained on the system before they're actually putting information in. Of course, they reminded us that the information out is only as good as the information in, so making sure that folks can use it. So all indications are that they will be available to us, and I think we can further articulate that in any contract we negotiate.
Yeah, I think training is important on both licensing and seed sale. I think it's more challenging on seed sale because it has to be in person. I think licensing, you can have videos that say, here's how you fill out a license application, but the seed sale, I think, requires in-person training, and I was very pleased that was Metric's approach, or Grandma's approach. but we can, I think, contractually make sure. I think we also want to have approval. I don't want to tell Sean what needs to be in the negotiations, but we talked as a group, but we want to really have approval not just on the resources that are going to be located locally, but who they are.
That's right.
Just so that we're comfortable with the project team that we're going to play, because it is a big company. Where JD Software, we know who we're getting.
Right.
Since Franwell's a bigger company, we want to know exactly who the team is and feel comfortable with that they can deliver.
And I would also just raise, in addition to training, one concern that I'm going to have is about their auditing capability too, and really their ability to be, particularly in kind of a first go round, right? I mean, the ability to really provide a robust auditing capability and to work with us as we are getting up to speed on that too.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Flanagan?
No, it all sounds good. I appreciate everyone's work on this.
Great. Then can I have a motion to authorize the executive director to begin negotiations with Franwell on a seed-to-sale tracking system?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Let the record show that the motion was made by Commissioner Flanagan, seconded by Commissioner Doyle. Commissioner Flanagan, your vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Doyle?
Aye.
Commissioner McBride?
Aye.
Commissioner Title?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman votes aye as well. Let the record show that we unanimously approve the recommendation to authorize, the motion to authorize the executive director to begin negotiations with Franwell on a seed-to-sale licensing system. My thanks along to everybody else's for the great work that the team did here, and I am confident. Technology development is always a little bit frightening. It has a high rate of unsuccess. But I'm confident both in the vendors that we're dealing and negotiating with, and I'm confident that if we put the appropriate resources on our side against it, which I know we will do, that we will get this done in time and to the specs necessary to launch. So, thank you very much. I am not aware of any additional topics that I was unaware of at the time the agenda was posted, so there being no further business before the Commission, this meeting is adjourned as of 11:10 a.m. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, yep, I did it's second time in a row I've done this. My apologies. Next meeting is Tuesday, the 23rd. We're back at our favorite place, which is the Gaming Commission offices. So, thank you all for coming out in the snow today.
Time?